Hi, I'm Emily from Two Little Birds Patterns, and thank you so much for tuning into my video. This video is all about tapestry crochet from start to finish. What is tapestry crochet? Well, for the purposes of my patterns, it's a method of color work I use when I'm only using 2 colors of yarn. The main color of yarn is used to stitch, while the contrast color is carried through the stitches. When it comes time to switch the colors, the contrast color yarn is used to make the stitches and the main color yarn is carried through. This process continues while following a graph for the entire project. If tapestry crochet seems difficult or intimidating to you, let me assure you that it's actually really fun and quite easy once you learn the color changing technique. This video goes step by step through a pattern I've designed for a pillow. The pattern is available as a free download by clicking the link in the description box below. After you've downloaded the pattern, you can follow along with me as I crochet it. I'm going to go over how to read the graph, how to begin the project, how much yarn you're going to need, how to make the color changes, and I'm also going to share some of my tips on how to minimize the show through of the yarn when it's carried through the stitches. I'll then explain how to assemble the front and back panels of the pillow to finish it up. At the end of this video, I hope that you find that tapestry crochet is a fun and relaxing method of crochet, and with just a little bit of practice, you can master it too. Let's get started. So hopefully by now you've downloaded the free pattern and printed it out, and we can look at it together so I can show you how to read the graph. Now, these symbols are very consistent throughout all of my patterns, but in case you've never done one of them before, I just wanted to go over what the symbols mean so we can understand how the graph works as we're going to crochet it. The first symbol in the legend is just a white square, which represents the main color. And that means that any of the white squares on the graph will be crocheted in the main color. My main color is right here. This is one of my favorite yarns to use. It's Aran Fleck by Red Heart. It's really neutral. It goes with a lot of different colors. I love the little specks in it. And I'll tell you another reason why I love using this color in a later part of this video, but it's part of my tips for tapestry crochet. The second symbol in the legend is a black square, which represents the contrast color. So that means that any of the squares on the graph that are in black will be crocheted in the contrast color. Now, coincidentally, the contrast color that I'm using for this pattern is black. Again, this is just Red Heart in black, and I like using this with the Aran Fleck. I think it's a great combination. Goes with all different color schemes. I just love it together. And as you can see in my shop, there's a ton of patterns where I use these 2 colors together. But again, you can use whatever color you want as your contrast color. So moving along, the little dot means that that is a right side row. So that means anytime you see the little dot on the row, that means that when you're crocheting that row, you will be facing the right side of your work. And same goes for the X, but it's the opposite. That's a wrong side row. So anytime you see the X, that means that when you're crocheting that row, you will be facing the wrong side of your work. So when you are crocheting this, once we get up here, let's say, when you're crocheting this row, your panel will be flipped and you'll actually see this part backwards. So it'll look reversed. The arrow pointing to the left, which is this guy and that guy, odd rows, that means that you are going to read that row in the graph from right to left. So for example, on row 7, I will be reading that row from here to there. So my first contrast color stitch will be this stitch right here. And again, the opposite for the arrow pointing from the left to the right, that means that when you're reading the graph, you're going to be reading the graph from left to right. So even number rows, let's say for example, row 12, you will be reading the graph from left to right. So your first contrast color stitch will be this one. And that's basically it for reading the graph. Next, we will go on and talk about how to start the project. Okay guys, we finally made it to the fun part of the pattern where we are going to actually start crocheting. So I want you to turn to page 10 of your pattern where it says front panel at the top. We are going to make a chain 49 using only the main color, which I've already done. Now, if you want to read along with me, I'm going to go over this section of the pattern that is written in green because these are some really important points about things that you want to do when you're crocheting the front panel of a tapestry pattern. You're going to begin by following the graph starting in the bottom right hand corner at row 1, stitch 1. That means that's right down here, okay? And it is here that you're going to introduce your contrast color, even though the design doesn't start for a few more rows. So that means we're going to crochet using the main color, but we're carrying the contrast color through these first 5 rows, even though the design doesn't start until row 6. And here's why. This is important. These are the reasons you should do this. The first reason is that you'll see a stripe of color across the middle of your panel due to the color variance if you only start it where the design begins. So that means that you're going to see main color only, and then you'll see main color and contrast color together, which will look like a stripe, okay, when you see it from far away, and then it'll look like main color only. So it's going to kind of look like you have this different color variance across the middle of your panel, and we want it to look consistent throughout. So even though the design doesn't start until here, we're still going to carry the contrast color through all the way, and then of course through these rows, and then again at the top, even though there's no design at the top. The second reason is you're going to get a ridge, like a thickness difference, where the double thickness of yarn begins if you don't start it from the beginning. So imagine you're going to be using the main color only, and then all of a sudden you're going to introduce the contrast color here, and you're going to notice a thickness difference, okay? Because here you're going to be using 2 strands of yarn, where here you are only using 1. So we don't want to see that thickness difference. We want it to, again, be consistent throughout. So we're going to start using the contrast color from the beginning, even though the design doesn't start till there. Now the third reason is the row count for this panel is based upon the double thickness throughout. And your panel might measure short if you don't use both yarns starting here. So that means that because of the double thickness of the yarn, your stitches are actually going to be a little bit taller because you're using 2 strands of yarn. And we want our panel to measure 12 inches. If we don't use the double thickness of yarn, it might measure a little bit short, because when I designed this, I designed it using the double thickness throughout, and this is how many rows I needed to get to 12 inches. So you want to make sure that you do start your contrast color in the row 1, stitch 1, bottom right hand corner, even though your design doesn't start until here. So here's how we're going to start that. I'm getting ready to make my first stitch. I'm going to take my contrast color and just kind of hold it with my chain. I'm still using my main color to make the stitches, but I'm going to make them over the contrast color. So my first single crochet is going to go in my second chain from the hook. Okay, but I'm going to be crocheting over this contrast color. And then I'm going to keep going over the contrast color and down the chain. so as you can see so far, my contrast color is in those stitches. I've crocheted over the contrast color, okay? And I'm going to keep going. Crocheted in the last chain there, and you might notice that things might be a little bit kind of looking funny on the back. That's okay. Maybe just try to take your contrast color and give it a little tug and just even out your stitches as best you can. This will all kind of work itself out as you work some more rows. So that was row 1, and that was a right side row. I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work, and now I'm working row 2, which again is just all main color, and I'm going to take my contrast color and make sure that it is carried around on this wrong side. So I'm not going to have it come around this way. I'm going to have it come around so it's on the wrong side. I'm going to then make my first stitch in the first single crochet, and I'm going to crochet row 2, which again is just main color over top of the contrast color. And as you can see, the carryover of the contrast color is visible, but it's on the wrong side, and that's what we want. So every time we finish a row, we want to make sure that we carry the contrast color around on the wrong side. I'm going to continue with row 2, and then I'll show you row 3. I just completed the last stitch of row 2. I'm just going to make sure that I don't have any little pieces of the black yarn showing through on row 2, but again, this is a wrong side row, so it looks pretty good to me. I chained 1, and I'm going to flip my work. But again, I'm going to make sure that I carry my contrast color around on the wrong side. So that means it is going to go behind my work. I'm going to start row 3, making single crochets all the way down, but again, my contrast color is carried around on the wrong side so you don't see it. Usually when I'm crocheting a right side row, the back ends up looking really messy, and I'll show you what I do when I get to the end of row 3, which is a right side row. Okay, so I'm at the end of row 3. I'm just going to take a look at the back, which I don't know if you can see, but there's little pieces of the contrast color yarn that is showing through here. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to give my contrast color a little bit of a tug. And it just takes it right away. It just evens it right out. So I'm just going to smooth out these stitches, make sure that my piece isn't warping at all, but it looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead with row 4 and 5 because on the graph, rows 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all done in main color while carrying the contrast color through. And I'm going to come back when I get to row 6 and I will go over how we can start making our color changes. All right, I'm done with row 5 and now I'm about to begin working row 6. Row 6 is a wrong side row, so as you can see, the carryover of the contrast color is showing on the sides because that's where I carried it over. And it is not showing on the other sides, so that's a good thing. But now we're about to start row 6, and we need to look at our graph because this is where we're going to begin making color changes. Now, as I said in the beginning, even number rows work from left to right. And you can see by the symbols on the graph that the arrow is pointing that way and it's a wrong side row, which is what the X symbolizes. So we're going to start over here on the left and I'm going to count how many stitches I need before I get to my first contrast color stitch. And that is going to be 19 stitches. So I'm going to make 18 stitches. And on the 19th stitch, I'm only going to make half a stitch. I'll show you what that means. I've made 18 stitches. I'm going to make sure that I don't need to smooth out any of the little bubbles from the black yarn, but it looks pretty good. I've made 18 stitches and now I'm going to make my 19th stitch. I'm only going to do it halfway. I'm going to insert my hook in the stitch, pull up a loop, but now instead of completing that stitch with the main color, I'm going to bring the main color forward over top of the contrast color, like that. And then I'm going to pick up the contrast color as if I'm going to start working with it. I'm going to take my hook and I'm going to do what I call a yarn under. And that means I'm just going to grab my yarn and pull it through those stitches. So now I have the contrast color on my hook and I'm going to begin working with that for stitch number 20. So I have 19 main color stitches here that I've completed. This actually completed the 19th stitch, but now I'm going to start with the contrast color stitches. And on the graph, there are 3 contrast color stitches before I then switch again back to the main color. So I'm going to make 2 contrast color stitches, and on the third one, I'm only going to do it halfway. Here's 1 and 2, and then my third one, I'm going to pull up a loop and stop right there. I'm going to do the same thing I just did. I'm going to pull my yarn forward over top of the other color. I'm going to pick up that color as if I'm going to work with it now, and I'm going to yarn under. So I'm just going to pull that through like that. So that completed my third stitch with the contrast color, and now I can begin working back again with the main color. And for this row, the rest of the stitches are done in main color. So I'll get to the end of row 6, and then I'll tell you about row 7. just putting my last stitch in row 6. I'm going to chain 1 and just make sure that I don't have to smooth out anything on the back here, but it looks pretty good. I'm going to turn my work, and again, now that I'm going to be working row 7, which is a right side row, I'm going to make sure that the contrast color is carried around on the back, like that. So starting in row 7, we are now going to be working from right to left. And if we look at the graph, row 7 is working right to left. So I'm going to start from over here. I'm going to go this way, and my first contrast color stitch will be here. So let me see how many stitches I need. 10, 15, 20. I need 25 main color stitches, and on the 26th stitch, I will start working in the contrast color. So that means I'm going to make 24 main color stitches and then a half of a stitch on the 25th stitch. So that's 24 stitches. I just want to check the back and see what I need to do to clean it up. Oh, there is a little bit of show through going on there. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of a tug and even that out. Make sure my edges are straight. Looks good. Now on my 25th stitch, I'm only going to do it halfway. So I'm going to insert my hook and pull up a loop, but then I'm going to stop. I'm going to bring my main color forward, and then I'm going to pick up my contrast color and yarn under and pull it through those loops. Now I can begin working with the contrast color, stitching over top of the main color. And the graph says that I need 5 contrast color stitches. So I'm going to do 5. Actually, I'm going to do 4, and then on the 5th one, I'm going to do a half and switch back over to the main color. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to do a half one on the 5th, bring my contrast color forward, pick up my main color, yarn under, and pull that yarn through. And now I can begin working again with the main color over top of the contrast color to finish up row 7. This process is going to continue for the entire graph, making color changes as it is specified on the graph and following it right to left or left to right, depending on which row it is. And that's basically it. I'm going to do a little bit more of this pattern and come back, and I'll do a few more rows when I get a little bit further into the design. Okay, so I finished up a few more rows in the pattern. I'm currently on row 19, which is a right side row. I'm going to be starting from over here, and I wanted to stop or come back to this place with you because I thought it would be important to go over a few more rows where there were more frequent color changes than what we had done in the very beginning. So if you want to follow along, I'm on row 19. And I'm going to kind of count as I go so that you can follow with me and maybe crochet at the same time. I'll be working with the main color for 12 stitches, and on that 12th stitch, I'm only going to do half a stitch. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and here on my 12th stitch I'm going to do half a stitch. So I'm only going to just put my hook in and pull up a loop. I'm going to check the back and give it a little bit of a tug so that the stitches even out and the contrast color doesn't bulge out in the back. Okay, so I did my half a stitch on that 12th stitch, and I'm going to pull my main color yarn forward over top of the contrast color. I'm going to then pick up my contrast color and yarn under. So just grab that yarn and pull it through the stitches. And that's it. Now I'm going to work with the contrast color. I have 2 contrast color stitches right there. So I'm going to do, 1 full stitch, and then the second one will be half a stitch. I'm going to bring my contrast color forward over top of the main color, and then I'm going to yarn under with the main color. Then I have 5 main color stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the 5th I'm going to do a half a stitch. So just pull up a loop, bring my main color forward, and then I'm going to yarn under with the contrast color. Then I have 3 contrast color stitches. 1, 2, and on the 3rd I'm just going to do a half a stitch, bring my contrast color forward and pick up the main color, and then yarn under just right through those loops. Then I have 5 main color stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to bring my main color forward and yarn under with my contrast color. Then I have 3 contrast color stitches. 1, 2, 3. So on that 3rd one I'm just doing the half a stitch. I'm going to pull my contrast color forward and yarn under with the main color. Okay, now I only have 1 main color stitch here in this row, right in this spot. So for that one, I'm just going to do half a stitch. So I'm just going to pull up a loop. I'm not going to finish that stitch. I'm going to bring my main color forward and then yarn under with the contrast color. And that's how you do 1 stitch. Now we have 6 contrast color stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Bring my contrast color forward, yarn under with my main color, and then continue finishing the rest of that row in main color stitches. Okay, so I've come to the end of that row, And as you can see, the yarn gets a little bit twisted. So usually at the end of each row, or sometimes at the end of 2 rows, depending, I'll go back and I'll untangle my yarn, because then it kind of gets a little easier to work with when it's not all twisted up. Okay, so I came to the end of row 19, and I like to highlight my rows as I go. It kind of helps me visualize easier which row I'm on. So I'm going to highlight row 19 because I finished that one. And I'm going to turn my work. So this is the right side. The high is starting to appear. When I flip it on the wrong side, it's backwards. Okay. And now we can begin working row 20, which we're going to read from left to right. And again, I'm going to go over these color changes with you, as they are a little bit more frequent in this row, just to kind of get the hang of it a little bit better, and especially these single stitches, how to work those. Oops. So I'm starting with row, oops, put my hook in different, with row 20, and I'm going to go 11 stitches. So I will do 10 full stitches, and on the 11th I will do a half. Seven, 8, 9, and 10. Oops. And then on the 11th, I'm going to do a half. Bring my main color forward, pick up my contrast color, yarn under through those loops, and then I'm going to do 4 contrast color stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 1 main color stitch. So I'm going to bring my contrast color forward, pick up the main color, yarn under, then I'll just do half a stitch, just pull up a loop. Then bring my yarn forward and switch back to the contrast color. Now I'm going to do 5 contrast color stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to switch to my main color, bring my contrast color forward, pick up my main color, yarn under, pull through those loops, and now I have 5 main color stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Bring my main color forward, pick up my contrast color, yarn under, and then I have 3 contrast color stitches. 1, 2, 3. Half a stitch on that last one. Bring my contrast color forward, pick up the main color, yarn under, and pull through. And now I'm going to do 6 main color stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. On that 6th one, I'm just doing half. I'm going to bring my main color forward, pull up my contrast color, yarn under, and pull through those loops, and just do 1 contrast color stitch. So that's half a stitch, bringing the contrast color forward, get the main color, yarn under, pull through the loops, and the rest of the row is done in main color. Okay, so those are two really good examples of rows where there are some more frequent color changes, and how to do those single color stitches when you're not doing full stitches. I'm just gonna highlight my row, turn my work, and I'm gonna keep going until we get to the top of the pillow, and then I will come back and I'll see you when it's done. Okay, so I finished crocheting the front panel, and before we get to crocheting the back panel, I wanted to go over some of my tips and tricks that I use to minimize the show through of the non-dominant yarn. So that means the yarn that is stitched in the other stitches, not the one that you're actually crocheting with. So the biggest question I get is actually this, is how do you hide the show through of the other yarn? And the answer is there's no real way to completely avoid it. I mean, you can see mine is definitely not perfect. You can see bits and pieces through the stitches. It is really unavoidable for the most part, but there are ways that we can minimize it, and that's what I'm going to go over with you right now. My first tip is that when you hold the non-dominant yarn as you're crocheting over it, you can hold it behind the stitches when you're crocheting a right side row, and in front of the stitches when you're crocheting a wrong side row. Let me show you what I mean. I left a little bit uncrocheted here at the top so I could demonstrate this for you. So I'm right now crocheting a right side row. I'm facing my right side, and as I crochet, I'm going to hold my non-dominant yarn, which in this case is my contrast color, behind the stitches. So as I crochet, this is going to be held behind my stitches. So as you can see, it's just the main color that is really showing. Okay. And similarly, when you are crocheting a wrong side row, which I will do right here, I'm going to hold my yarn in front of the stitches because this is the back side of my work, and that's the part that you're not going to see. So I'm going to start crocheting this row, holding the non-dominant yarn in front of my stitch. Okay, so again, I mean, it's not perfect, but it helps. Now I'm actually going to take out these stitches because this is not a row that was part of this pattern. I just did it to demonstrate. I actually finished the last row and that ended here. So my second tip is when you're at the end of a color section, so for instance, when you're done, let's say in this row, you're done crocheting the main color, give the non-dominant color a little tug because sometimes little bulges stick out. So you just, at the end of the row, you take your non-dominant color and you pull it. Now watch what happens if I pull it too tight. Do you see that? You don't want that to happen. So you don't want it to pull it so tight that it warps your fabric, but you want to pull it tight enough that it smooths out the stitches. Now see, I can just kind of reshape this and it's no problem. So if you see that you've pulled it too tight, you can just kind of reshape it like I just did, and you're back to where you started. So you don't want to pull it so that it warps, but you do want to pull so that the little bulges don't stick out. So you have even stitches and it's nice and flat. Another tip that I recommend is to crochet tightly. Now, again, you don't want to crochet so tightly that your fabric warps, but it is helpful to crochet tightly because it keeps those stitches closed up. You don't see as much of the other color showing through. I am a naturally tighter crocheter, so it comes a little bit easier to me because that's just the way I crochet. If you are more of a loose crocheter, just tighten it up a little bit and try to keep your tension even throughout. But that is another way that you can help hide the show through of the other color. And my last tip, which is kind of a fun one because it has to do with the colors of yarn that you're choosing, is let the yarn do the work for you. So pick a yarn that has flecks in it. For example, the yarn I used for this pillow panel is Aran Fleck by Red Heart. Okay, now as you see, it has flecks of other color in it. So it has a little bit of black, a little bit of brown, a little bit of gray. It's a nice neutral color. It goes with a lot of things. And when you look, it kind of draws your eye away from the show throw because, well, is it the yarn in the stitch or is it the fleck in the yarn? I don't know. So it kind of is a distraction. It kind of looks just like it's part of the yarn, and that helps hide it. A couple of other yarns that I actually just pulled from my yarn cabinet to show you other examples is, this is Vanna's Choice and this is Barley. So this is kind of a brown color. And again, it has flecks of like a cream color, a lighter tan color. There's some black in here. And this is another really good one. It's a nice neutral that can go with whites or browns or blacks. That's a great one to, hide the show through because it has those little flecks in it. Another one is Vanna's Choice in Gray Marble. So this is a gray yarn, and again, it has black and tan and brown in it. A really nice, pretty color that can hide the show through, just like this one with the little flecks in it. You can also use marbled yarns. So for example, this one is I Love This Yarn from Hobby Lobby. This one is Black Marble, and this would be great with like a white or a cream color. It just takes your eye away from it. And same with this one. It's a nice marbled gray. Actually, I think it's called, no, this one's called Gray Heather. This is a Premier yarn. I'm not being paid or anything to recommend these yarns. These are actually just my own personal choices. But I had them in my yarn cabinet and I thought I would share some examples of yarns that I would use that again would be helpful in hiding the show through when you're doing tapestry. Sometimes it's just unavoidable. If you have to use a really light color yarn and a really dark color yarn together, it's just kind of inevitable, but just try to crochet as tightly as you can and hopefully it'll close up those stitches and hide the show through. So other than those tips, it's really just kind of doing the technique over and over again and getting a lot of practice. And just the more you do it, the better you'll get, just like anything. Hope those tips were helpful. And now let's go on to finishing the front panel before we start the back panel. So I'm done with the front panel and I'm just going to clip the ends here. Oops, just didn't want that stitch to come out. Okay, I'm gonna leave a little bit of a tail so I can sew, so I can weave it in. Okay, so I'm done with these. And I have ends to weave in up here in the top corner and also down here in the bottom corners. I'm going to flip this over and weave my ends into the wrong side. Now let's move on to crocheting the back panel. Okay guys, so now we're going to be working the back panel for this pillow. And if you go to page 9 in the pattern, this explains all the stitching instructions for the back panel, which is basically just a flat square of all single crochets. We're going to start by making a foundation chain of 47, and this is going to be done only in the main color. You're just using the single strand of yarn. We're not carrying any yarn through. This is just regular old single crochet. So let's chain 47. Okay, and we're going to make our first single crochet in the second chain from the hook and on down the chain for a total of 46 single crochets. I'm going to keep doing this for each of the rows until the panel measures 12 inches tall. I'd also like to note that depending on your tension, you might want to check and see how wide your panel is when you're done crocheting maybe 2 or 3 rows. And if it's too wide, if it's wider than 12 inches, you might want to start over with fewer starting chains. If it's longer than 12 inches, or excuse me, if it's shorter than 12 inches, then you might want to start over with a few more starting chains. This back panel is quite easily adjustable to your tension, so this one is a little easier to do. But yes, we're going to keep doing these single crochets all the way up for a total of 46 stitches across until our panel reaches 12 inches in height. And I've given an estimate of 55 rows. That's just an estimate. I would just keep measuring as you go, and once you hit 12 inches, just stop. It might be more rows than the front panel. It might be about the same. Usually it takes more rows to crochet the back panel than it does the front panel, because the front panel, remember, we used 2 strands of yarn together, which makes each stitch a little bit taller. And therefore the front panel works up quicker than the back panel does, because the back panel is just using the single strand of yarn. I'm going to keep crocheting this back panel, and I will come back when it is completed. All done here with the back panel. Just finishing up the last stitches, and then I will cut my yarn and make sure that I have woven all the ends into the wrong side of the panel. Okay, so we're done with the back panel. We are done with the front panel, and I'm going to show you how I assemble the panels and finish up this pillow. What I'm going to do is put my right sides together. So here, this is my right side, and this is my right side. So I'm going to put the two right sides together, one on top of each other. And then I am going to use my stitch markers as pins to temporarily pin all the edges together. I usually like to do the corners first and then fill in the middles. I'm going to keep going around with stitch markers, and then I'll show you how we slip stitch around the sides to form the pillow cover. Okay, so now we're going to be making slip stitches around the right, the top, and the left sides of the panel. We're going to be making a pillow cover that we're going to put an insert into. And I'm going to show you how I do these slip stitches around the side. I just take a piece of my main color yarn, and I just evenly go along the sides and make slip stitches. Sometimes it gets a little stuck. Sorry about that. There we go. So I'm going through both panels. Just kind of making almost like a surface crochet along the sides. Can you see that? And just taking out these stitch markers as I go, because they're just kind of holding it in place. This does take a little bit of concentration. It's not a quick stitch. Oops. Because you do want to make sure it's even and neat. And sometimes it takes a little bit of force to get that hook through. But it makes for a really clean edge when you turn these right side out. All right, and I'm gonna keep going around the panel, and I'll meet you back when I'm ready to turn it right side out. We've come to the end of doing the slip stitching around the sides. Oops. I'm gonna put my last one here in the corner. I just chain one and I cut myself a long tail. that will get woven in later. Right, so our sides are neatly stitched together with the slip stitch going all on the right hand side, the top side, and the left hand side. And now this is my favorite part. I'm going to flip it inside out, or I should say right side out, and we're about to put the pillow insert in. It's like the big reveal. Make sure that I get all the corners pushed out. And I'm going to now insert the pillow form. I am using this 12-inch pillow insert. I got this one at Joann's, but you can use whatever kind you want. You can also use polyfill, just regular, not with this cover over it. Whatever your preference is. I prefer a pillow form, but you know, like I said, you can kind of use what you have. If you have an old 12-inch pillow at your house that you don't like, stuff that in there and you got a brand new cover. Got the pillow insert in there, and I'm going to take a long piece of my main color yarn and cut it, and then I thread it through my yarn needle, and I'm going to do a whip stitch on the bottom of the pillow to close up that bottom side. These are my tails left over from the two panels, and I will weave them in when I'm done sewing it up. First, what I do is I take my stitch markers again, and I do stitch up the pin the bottom of the pillow so that it is matched up evenly, and I'm making sure that I am sewing it so that the center of the back is sewn to the center of the front. Okay, and here we go. I'm going to start on the right hand side here, and I just insert my yarn needle, and then I'm just going to keep going like this across the entire bottom of the pillow. Holding it together as I go. And then I can take out this stitch marker when I get to it. And I'm going to just keep going until I get to the edge. done. I'm so excited. We are in the home stretch. I'm gonna weave these ends in. Oh, I don't wanna reveal it yet. I'm just going to take my yarn needle and kind of weave this tail into the back of the pillow. And what I do is I just give the yarn a little pull like that and then clip it. And it just magically disappears in the pillow. I'm gonna do that for all the tails. Give it a little pull and just gently pull it and it magically disappears. I love that trick. Maybe it's not a trick. 2 more to go, guys. Little pull. We are done. You ready? There it is. There is our pillow using Tapestry Crochet. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you learned some new things, and I hope you had fun and realized that Tapestry Crochet is actually very easy and fun and relaxing, and the possibilities are endless. And happy crocheting!